Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Desktop Developer Show. Hello, Billy. Hello, Michael.
Hi.
Hey, Walt. Good to be back.
It is good to be back, and I am excited to have Michael on the show today. I've been following what he's been doing on the toolkit for a while, and I'm interested in a lot of things to talk to you today, Michael. But first of all, let's position where you are at Microsoft. You are a developer, yes?
Yes. I'm a senior software engineer. I've been at Microsoft for almost 12 years now, so a little while.
Yeah, and you're working on, you're a full-time developer on the toolkit?
Yes. So my main focus is basically the maintainer of the Windows Community Toolkit. I'm a full-time Microsoft employee that's part of tasked with working on the project. It's also part of the .NET Foundation, so that's an exciting bit. We're all doing all of our work in the open source up on GitHub, so it's a really exciting platform for us to engage with folks in the community and really get a lot of exciting work done that everyone can see what we're building and how it works and use it.
And for those that might not know, can you give like a 60-second, what is the Community Toolkit and what's its goal?
Yeah, exactly. So the Windows Community Toolkit is kind of a set of helpers and controls and other kind of services, just a whole smorgasbord of stuff that's pretty much useful for any person doing Windows 10 application development. Most of our controls are more in the UWP space, but we're looking more at the new WinUI 3 stuff that's happening. That's going to unify kind of the desktop and the sandboxed environment UI framework stuff. So we can talk more about that later. And so we're really just kind of the way I like to kind of phrase it. If you look at the traditional inbox platform SDK controls and the WinUI library itself, those are like the building blocks that everyone needs to build an application. The toolkit really provides all the rest, right? Like maybe not everyone needs it in every application, but it's something that a majority of folks are going to need in some of their applications. And so collectively, it's this kind of it's a toolbox of all these different components that are going to help you out in different scenarios depending on the types of apps that you're building. So you might not use everything in the toolkit all the time, but you're going to pretty much be using something from the toolkit in one of your apps the majority of the time. And so that's the place that we kind of fit in.
Now, I like to see people go and investigate it because there's an app in the Windows Store that you can download and sort of show all the controls. And I was drawn to the section on animations, the behaviors that do that, because, well, from my own experience putting apps out there, even in prototype, when people see that there are integrated animations that fit well with the flow, that raises their bar for what they think about.
Yeah, exactly. The animations is one of our bigger and more widely used packages, and it's something. So we have a release coming up early next week, our 6.1 release. It's actually probably one of our biggest releases ever. So we've got a lot of cool new stuff,
exciting.
And I can show you a little bit of preview here. I mean, it's all up on GitHub, so we've been shipping preview NuGet packages since build and stuff. So like it's all in the open. That's what's great about working on GitHub. But I'll show you live in our sample app later. But for our next release, our 7.0 release, we do want to spend a little bit of time cleaning up some of our animation stuff and working on that and working on some shadow stuff. Shadows are very popular with the Fluent design language and making pretty apps. And so there's a lot. We have a lot of things planned that we want to work on and tinker. I've been doing some experiments on my own dev streams that I've been doing on Twitch the past few months. So there's a sneak peek of some of the stuff that I've been thinking of, but I have to get back to working on that later.
So a question about the animation. So you're adding animation tools to the toolkit to make it easier for me to write an animation. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Apply an animation is probably a better word.
Right.
Yeah, apply an animation, yeah.
And then, but also the WinUI 3, the WinUI team's working on version 3, and they've been doing a lot of work in the animation. Are you leveraging what they're working on? How does that relationship work?
Yeah, so we work closely with the WinUI team. We have a good relationship. There's a lot of things that are now in the WinUI SDK that came from the toolkit. So things like tab view, the menu control, radial gradient brush just recently. It was in WPF, but we had a stopgap for UWP, and now they've added it into the platform in their 2.4 release. There's a few other ones we've had, but so there's been a lot of things where like the toolkit kind of becomes this test bed, and we can kind of show like, hey, there's actually a need for this. Oh, the navigation view is the biggest one, of course. Everyone uses navigation view in their app, and that started as a control in the toolkit. We call it the hamburger menu. So we have a good relationship there, kind of showing like, hey, these are controls that the community is using and is excited about, and we see a lot of developers using in their applications, and so we can kind of provide that data for them, and then they can leverage some of the work we've done in terms of architecture of the control, or the control pattern, and add that into the SDK. And so the animations and all that other stuff is kind of no different. Like we work with, we have to work on top of what's provided by the SDK. And our goal is really just, to try and make it even easier for developers to use, or there's a lot of power in the composition APIs, but it's all done through code behind. And so we try to expose that in Xaml to make it easier to consume, where you're kind of developing your UI code.
Thank you.
And yeah, so those are some of our most popular animation parts. Is we have some implicit helpers and some the page transition helpers for those composition APIs. So I can demo those too.
And that's a pretty big deal. I've known since the earliest days of WPF. Because I've taught lots and dozens of XAML classes, and I finally took animation out of my content because it was the one area where it was a bridge too far for an introductory XAML class to try to teach people animation. I just stopped doing it. So a lowered entry point, I think that's really valuable.
Yeah,
that's nice.
Exactly.
I remember, back in the day, we used to use the blend tool because nobody wanted to write all of the animation. So you'd use the blend tool, and then you could say, here's the two states to animate between them, and then that kind of disappeared. Is there any sort of, if there's any IDEs that are going to make that easier?
I know Blend is still kind of around. It's gone through transitions and other things, so it's not something like I focus a lot more on like XAML as a whole, and like how to leverage certain components and bring them into that space. One of my other colleagues on my team, Justin Liu, who is amazing to follow on Twitter, he is a master of animations and storyboards and all that. So he makes everything look amazing. I'd love to have some of his skills, but I focus on the core mechanics. But because of that, right, like there's this kind of gap where, especially with animations and things, you want to see them be happening, and that's kind of what led me to doing one of my side projects with the Microsoft Garage, which is this tool called Xaml Studio, which is also in the Microsoft Store, and it's for rapid prototyping. So you can just kind of paste in your XAML and see the result live, whether it be animations or buttons and boxes that you can click on and interact with. So it's really kind of this quick and dirty way to kind of see what you're doing with like the XAML pads of the past with WPF. Those are always useful tools, but this is for now UWP development and has a modern spin. And so that's a tool that I've kind of worked on, chipped away at here and there on the side to kind of provide a little bit of a stopgap. It doesn't have the best IntelliSense or some of those other tools like Visual. It's not meant to compete with Visual Studio or anything. It's just meant to like quickly copy in your XAML. Maybe it's from a doc in an example, but tinker with it a bit, see the result, and then bring it into your app. And we have a little bit of that in our sample app as well for the Community Toolkit, where you can actually tinker with our samples live and see the outcome of playing with our controls. That was actually the precursor to some of the stuff I was working on for my XAML Studio stuff. So it's all related.
I see somebody in the comments. Jeremy Sinclair says XAML Studio is awesome, and I have to agree. I have it on my system too.
Yeah, Jeremy's been a fan for a while, so appreciate the support.
Did you have something you wanted to show us in that space?
Yeah, I can just show the sample app. You can get an idea.
I'd like to say before you show that, you said something in the pre-show which I just thought was awesome. You called it the Gallery of Inspiration.
Yeah.
So, let's inspire us. Yeah, let's try this again. I have to click on the right
Yeah, no, there we go. So this is our sample app. This is actually a debug version of what I'm putting together for our upcoming release. So that has got the pretty flowers that we're going to use for our 6.1 release coming up next week. And these are we had to cut this list down to like half. So this is just a small sample of the new stuff that's coming in our upcoming release. We'll have more in the full release notes that you'll be able to see, and some of them are just variations on a theme. But yeah, we really want to make it easy for folks to see what's possible in the toolkit, what they can do, and what's possible. And so the tokenizing text box is one of our new controls. And so what's kind of special about this is you can it looks like an auto suggest box at first, but as soon as you start picking things, they become these tokens, which then make it super easy for the user to, add or remove, and really manipulate what they're adding here. So you can think of these like as tags for some sort of triage issue. I could come over here and I could change this out to a different one as well. So there's a lot of power and flexibility here. Or, it's like the typical email address scenario. So, I'm going to be selecting my contacts and adding them to the to field of my email. So it's kind of a common thing you see in a few different scenarios, but that's not something until now that we've had available in the platform. And so that's what we have flexibility with in the toolkit. And then Billy, of course, was mentioning like animations. And so our implicit animations are kind of a popular one. And so now if we, there we go. Toggle visibility. If we move the element, we get these nice smooth animations, can scale the element. And all this is done now just through Xaml. And so if I actually wanted to make this box blue instead of red, I could put that in here. And so you just have this kind of live playground. And that's exactly what my Xaml Studio kind of project that I did with the Microsoft Garage is all about, taking this live test bed, right? And letting you test things out with XAML and change things around, right? If I wanted to see how my list view behaved with different things, I can just come in here, right? I can see the result.
This is Xaml Studio?
This is Xaml Studio now, but it's all the same technology that we use in our sample app. This is the sample app actually uses the precursor to it, and then I continued on and built this tool outside of that. So
I have a question on that. So is the Xaml Studio, is that also open source?
Not yet. That's been my goal for a while. It's a little tricky since I kind of did it on my own, like within my kind of work time, like side time, and anyway, that's been the part that I have to unravel, and so that's my next step, is trying to figure out how I can do that. Like where does it live in the open source, right? Like
right. Well, I'm asking for a selfish reason, because I wrote a tool a long time ago called Shazam Shader Editor, and I had to write similar, where you take the XAML and parse it and then render it on the screen. And I'd be curious to see how you implemented something like that.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is in the sample app, and the sample app's all open source.
Okay.
And so a lot of the heavy lifting is done by a platform API that's actually provided called Xaml Reader, which knows how to take some XAML and give you the result that you can add to your application. The editor here is actually the Monaco editor that's from Visual Studio Code. It's the same editor, but this is now embedded in a web view and exposed with a C# like API. That's something that I did also on the side, and that part is open source. That I need to actually ship a new version of soon. I don't know when I'm going to get to that. That's me finding time for all my various projects, but.
Well, the part that I want to dig into is the animation itself. And since it's open source, I guess I can, because this looks like, see, in WPF, I grew very dependent on fluid move behavior, because it helped me build an animations very, very quickly. That was usually, I don't know, 80 or 90% of what I wanted to sort of give the smoothness in the app. This looks like a supercharged version of fluid move behavior here.
Yeah, exactly. And, so for the implicit ones, we can basically, you can have when the element is shown or when it's hidden, you can basically add these animations there. And so then we have like a translation in the opacity So you can see that we're having some scalar keyframes here as well. So, and this is just all plugging directly into the composition APIs that are already available in the platform. It's just normally you'd have to hook all this up in your code behind and figure out how all these things kind of cascade together. But here now you can just copy and paste these XAML examples into your onto your element, and you're good to go, right? And then you can just add these other kind of elements and say like, oh, if I'm modifying the offset or the rotation angle or the scale, like I actually want to animate any of those property changes. So all this button does in behind the scenes is modify the scale property to say, change the numbers, and then the animation's just all handled by having this one extra tag of XAML.
Yeah. No,
nice.
And the animations is one example of where there's kind of some initial resistance to figuring it out and doing it. It's just hard enough that it discourages people from doing it. And so it looks like the toolkit is kind of oriented around that. The services, for example, is another area. Doing the research to figure out how to talk to OneDrive or something is probably not what a typical developer wants to do. So now you've lowered the barrier for that. There's a OneDrive service, I notice, in the
so we have services. They're a little bit tricky because most of them are driven by external entities, and so they change underneath us, and it's hard for us to upkeep them a bit. So it's something that I've been kind of thinking about and need some community input in or assistance on, like what do we do with some of these services. But the Microsoft Graph is obviously a big thing within Microsoft. And if you're not familiar with the Microsoft Graph, actually let me pop open another tab here. Oops. Bring this over. So the Microsoft Graph is basically all about connecting to your data, connected to what you're doing with Office products or Windows. And whereas the Graph Explorer here is a great tool to just kind of see what's available. So for instance, you can get information about your mail or your, and this is just a sample dummy data. But you can get information about OneDrive or Teams and all these different things. So all the stuff that you're doing connected to your Microsoft account goes to the Microsoft Graph. So it's a very rich set of data, but it's protected. Like whenever an application wants to use this data, it has to ask the user for permission and say like, hey, I want to look at your calendar so that I can help you manage it, right? And so the user has to explicitly let the application that the developer is developing, have permission to that data. And so this is the next thing that we're really exploring in the toolkit, and something I'm actually still quickly updating. But we have a set of controls that we're working on for the Windows Community Toolkit that make it super easy, like just grabbing a client ID from Azure, dumping it in your XAML, and now, bam, you're connected to the Microsoft Graph, and you'll be able to make calls to the Graph. And then just as easily, let me go to the sample page here. I don't have this working in our sample app yet, otherwise I'd show it. That's the last piece I'm still working on.
That'll be in the next release.
Yeah. Oh, not that one. It's these also will work in XAML islands eventually. There's a bug that we have to fix with the tokenizing text box in the next release, which is going to be our in 7.0. We're going to be supporting XAML islands better than we are now. We do some support now, but there's certain things that have changed that we need to update our target SDK for, which is what we're going to do in the 7.0 release. But now, I can have a login button, so I can have my user just authenticate to the Graph. I can put in a people picker, so now if they want to pick their emails of their contacts or for a message or whatever, I can just do that. So we're going to have these simple to use controls that are Graph enabled, nice. and make it really easy to use. And a lot of this work is actually being done by another side of my team. They started this thing called the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, which is for web developers. And so they have a whole bunch of different Graph-enabled controls for agenda, for to-do items, for Teams channel pickers. So they're really pushing this space. And that was the inspiration here, is like they made it super simple to connect to the Graph using web components and just, this having this really simple pattern. I'm like, there's no reason we shouldn't be able to do this in Xaml too. And so I started exploring this last summer based on all the effort that they had put together. And so that's something we're still kind of working on and figuring out. But that's kind of some of the new stuff we're going to be focusing on more this summer is bringing the toolkit ones back up to speed a little bit more with what the work they've been doing this past year.
How go ahead, Billy.
Well, I was going to say that I really think it's a great idea for desktop developers to get all these sample apps and get the stuff from GitHub and just go and explore it, because they're very likely to run into places where they could enhance their existing apps pretty quickly without doing very much work. Because I remember when I did my first big UWP app, I had to basically write that control that let you choose from one or more from a list, because that's such a common application scenario. And the average, and even if you don't have anything with WPF really do that either. So what that means is that people have probably fudged up something to do it that isn't really very, very, very easy and obvious to use. So they could take their fudged up thing and just replace it with a very, very slick alternative.
Exactly. Nice. We have all the documentation in the sample app here. So it's pretty easy just to come in here and look at something like, oh, what's this pipeline brush? This is one of our new features.
I want to see this.
Sergio. Yeah, this is pretty phenomenal. So there's a lot of power that you have with the composition APIs and like Win2D and stuff. And so the pipeline brush just lets you combine these effects in any order that you want. So if I wanted less blur on this effect, I can just come in here and change that. If I wanted, so I have this luminance to alpha effect. If I wanted to have that bleed through more, I can increase the opacity of that. So there's basically, if I wanted to increase the darkness of this shade effect, I could do that, or I could lower it. So it lets you stack all these different effects on top of one another and build a completely custom brush here to use in your application. So it's
and they're pipelined in the order that they are listed here.
Exactly. So it starts from the top and goes down, and then
nice. That's really nice.
Yeah, and then you can kind of bring in other sources if you want as well, and so you can kind of have this kind of tree of effects. And that's kind of all called out in the documentation here and it also works from code behind too, so you can build these up in C# if you want as well. So really, really powerful stuff that's getting added to this release in the toolkit. We have a tile brush as well, so if you want a simple tiled background, you can see in the background, this is the vertical one is the original source. And then all we do is we add the tile brush with the texture. And so now, as wide as we make this element in the middle here, it'll just automatically tile that texture and repeat it for us automatically. So
I've written something like this in the past, and it's nice to see this coming into the toolkit.
Yeah, we're really excited. I think half of the new features from our CUME member Sergio. He's got some great stuff for .NET developers as well, and so we've been focusing a little bit on just .NET in general, because that's the core of the application. The developers we're targeting are using .NET. The toolkit built in C#. And so .NET is an important aspect of a lot of applications. And so now we have things like a guard API. So instead of doing all these argument exception checks at the start of your method, the guard API just makes it kind of like you're doing your asserts. And now it'll automatically do all the proper checks based on your nice, easy to read name and throw the proper message. So this is a really exciting API to really simplify, doing all the proper work that you should at the top of a method. No excuses now.
Yeah. Making it. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Walt. I cut in on you once. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say, making it easy is always makes it easy to go down the golden path.
Yeah. Another part, and one of the new things too, is the high performance API. So if you're doing really performance critical stuff with different arrays and other things, we have a set of helpers now that you need to make sure you read the documentation and understand how to use properly, but can really kind of eke out every last instruction for you. So that's an exciting thing that's coming up. Other new things we have some items repeater layouts. So items repeater is kind of the new raw base container for doing, highly performant virtualized scenarios. And so we have a couple of our kind of staple panels now moved over to layout. So we have a wrap layout for that scenario. We also have like kind of the Pinterest style view with the staggered layout. And so Jeremy didn't know about the card AP. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And then also, if you're familiar with Morton, he had a set of state triggers, and so now those are in the toolkit now as well. So if you need converters or triggers or any of those things, you have one spot to come to actually look at these. So if you're trying to do validation scenarios, you can use these triggers to automatically have nice XAML elements appear with your visual state group. Now you can do all this kind of stuff in XAML easily with these triggers. So a lot of cool stuff coming to the toolkit. I don't think we have even more features than that have been added, some other helpers and things, but I think those are the big highlights. And so the easiest way to get started is just to download our app from the store, just like you would the XAML controls gallery, and you can play that. And then this will hopefully get to the store. I have to upload it. Hopefully, I don't know if I'll make it today, maybe tomorrow. But the goal is to get our release out for 6.1 early next week, and there'll be a blog post up on the Windows Dev blog that announces that. And if you follow me on Twitter at XamlLama, then you'll find out about all that stuff too, because I will be hyping up our release. So
this is your Twitter handle. Does that explain why you're wearing the
we didn't talk about the hat. That's why I've got the hat and the llamas behind me as well.
We have your own what's the word I'm looking for? Persona.
It's become my persona. It just started as a lark kind of. I was like, I want to help some folks out with UWP XAML. There's not a lot of discussion about it. This was obviously a couple years ago now, and I was like, okay, well, what am I going to call myself? And my wife's really into animals, and so I was like, well, llamas are pretty cool. And then I get like 3 L's in the name, so that's kind of fun for the alliteration. And then I have a fun little mascot, and then my coworker got me this hat, and so
it just fits over your headphones. That's
I noticed that, and people who are thinking about kind of breaking in and doing community things and establishing a reputation, maybe moving up to national speaking, should not minimize the branding, the symbolism or whatever that make people remember you. Because I did this completely accidentally. People remember me by my hair. My hair is kind of my brand, and you start to look at some of my profile pics, and I have a cartoonized one. It's the hair. It's the silhouette of the hair. Nice. that kind of makes that specifically me. So everybody needs to find something like that.
Yeah,
they're going to be public.
Yep.
Okay, this is exciting. I can't wait to. So you say this will be out as soon as you get around to publishing it? Real soon.
We've been delayed a little bit for a variety of reasons, but yeah, it's really just the last piece I really have to do is just finish integrating our updates to the graph controls into the sample app. We have a little bit of a messy build process around that, and that's something that I need to address and fix in our next release. We thought it was a good idea at the time to have them as separate repos, and then realized that it made it a little bit tricky to manage. So sorting that out a bit. I'm going to do an experiment, I think, to see if I can make it easier to build. But that's the last bit I need to work on.
Using some sort of automation build tool?
The sample app is the last piece that we kind of need to automate a bit more. I think my coworker was sharing that he was playing with that at some point. So it's something that's on our list to look at and investigate. We just, for this last release, got our unit tests running in our CI pipeline. So that's just really helped with having stability and some quality control, and like ensuring that, okay, if we're adding something new, we should probably add unit tests around it. And now they actually are run as part of the check-in process, and we can validate that, obviously that they're that we haven't broken anything else incidentally with any of our changes. So that's been really powerful. And so getting the sample app as part of that build process and pipeline is one of the next steps. So for now, it's just a manual step that I have to do and upload to the store, but we'll get there eventually. So I didn't really talk about it. So if we have a minute, I'm happy to talk more about the actual team I'm on and where I sit in Microsoft. So so myself and the toolkit doesn't fit, it's not part of the platform SDK. It's not part of the developer division. We're in our own group called PAX, which stands for Partners, Analytics, and Essential Experiences. And so part of our org is geared towards how do we work with partners of Microsoft that are developing their applications on Windows 10. So it could be in the educational space, it could be in the healthcare space, it could be in the productivity space. So we have a lot of our program managers on our team are working either looking at these big verticals about, okay, what are the challenges of building applications for education on Windows and what are those needs, or working with specific partners that we have engagements with and figuring out, okay, what do they need to build an app? And then another part of our team actually owns all the inbox applications like Calculator and Notepad, Maps, Photos. They're looking at, okay, well, how do we make sure we exemplify, like with the open sourcing a calculator, like what are the best practices and what it takes to build these applications. And so we're trying to work more together to figure out, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what are those pieces that third-party developers also need? And so how could we kind of, leverage the toolkit as a vehicle for some of those ideas? So there's a lot of, marriage of thought about what we're trying to do in our organization and looking at analytics. Okay, what types of apps are popular? What are the trends now? And what do we need to be focused on? So we're really trying to working collectively together, figuring out, okay, how do we make this developer experience better for our partners, and then in turn everyone else in the community and that we work with. And so, we work closely with a lot of the MVPs as well to get their feedback. And so we try to be an echo chamber within Microsoft to work with the other teams in the platform and developer division around, okay, what's really important here? What do we need to be driving? And that's where like our relationship with the toolkit and the WinUI team talking about WinUI 3. And, so that we were using the toolkit a lot as a test bed. Like the toolkit does a whole bunch of everything. And so if the toolkit's not going to work on WinUI 3, well, then that's going to be a problem for pretty much anyone else, right? Because we're doing a lot of, we're doing some fancy stuff here and there, but we're also just doing a lot of the fundamentals. And it's just such a large set of components now that it's quite the test suite in itself, right? And so my colleague Alex worked very closely with them, basically starting with the alpha. Like he was at what's the conference there in last November?
Ignite.
Ignite, yes, thank you. Blanked on the name there. But so he was at Ignite and they released the alpha. And so like the next day he had been tinkering with the toolkit, trying to get it to work on top of that and finding issues. And so we're working very closely with them to report like, okay, these are the challenges we've been having and these are the challenges we still have. And then we coordinated with them to ship a version of the toolkit that works on top of WinUI 3 for their desktop applications on .NET 5. And so you can actually find a link to an issue on our GitHub about that. I can actually share that in the chat somewhere too eventually.
While you're doing that, there's a question too that says, it's from Yoshi.
Yeah.
The question is the toolkit accepting new controls for the 7.0 release?
We're always accepting ideas and controls and everything. Everything's up on GitHub. So the best way to get started is just to create an issue and say like, here's my idea, or here's something I already have that I'd like to contribute. And then, that opens up the discussion. We get feedback from other developers. They can, give it thumbs up and kind of help us prioritize ideas. But yeah, so right now we're basically just kind of locked down for the 6.1 release, but it doesn't mean we're not thinking about the 7.0 stuff. And so the best way is just to open up an issue and get that conversation started. And now is the time to talk about what we want to do for 7.0. And the earlier you kind of get into that cycle, the easier it is for us to work with you to figure out how to bring that into the toolkit if it makes sense. And if you haven't done anything, like contribute to the open source project before, you can, give you guidance on that. Something that we want to focus on more is cleaning up and making it even easier to contribute to the toolkit. We've done a little bit of work on that, but the toolkit's also a big project now, so there's a lot of different dependencies. So we're trying to clean up a lot of that in our next release, and so there's all these kind of like bookkeeping things that we're trying to get to. But it's always a good time to reach out with us. I hang out on the UWP Community Discord server, which is an awesome community of folks. I know a few of them are watching. That's where Yoshi's and Sergio are from, I know, and Matthew I think was on here too. So anyway, it's a great community, and I hang out there and engage the community there. So I'm always happy to answer questions, or figure if you're having troubles with the toolkit, let us know. Like we want it to make sure that's working. It has a broad reach, and so we're always trying to get things together. But yeah, so as I was saying, like we do all this partner work, and that's kind of what drives my focus on the toolkit is like, okay, what do we need to deliver for our partners or to improve the ecosystem, and then how does that mesh with what the community needs, and what are these other things and challenges that they have, and are those things that are gonna help a broader set of people, or that we know that partners are trying to work with and do, and so that's kind of what guides my focus.
I'm really happy to see this stuff, because I mean, going all the way back to because it's a big gap, and I'm going all the way back to the WPF days. I guess probably the perception inside Microsoft of me talking about some of this stuff is I'm just a crank, because I'm all the time saying, you need to fill, this is a gap you need to fill. And I did it with the WPF team, and then with the Windows 8 team, and then with the Windows 10 UWP team. So I don't know that I ever had any effect, but at least I'm glad to see that.
Yeah.
Some people have decided that gap is real.
Right. Well, that's where the toolkit really fits in. It fills in those gaps, right? Because that's the challenge the platform team has, is like once they have something in there, they need to support it. They need to make sure it works in all these different environments. So there's a large overhead there. And so for some things, even for like smaller things, like they don't have that research or that data to show like, okay, this is something that really everyone needs to build, every one of their apps, or 90% of their apps, right? There's that high percentage bar where they think the majority of people are going to need this thing, whatever that is, right? And as I said with the toolkit, that bar of what we think people need is it might just be 30%, but that's still a large number, and that's still something that there's benefit in having in a shared place where lots of people can pick that up and share that component. And once you grab 10 different things that in those different buckets, like it just collectively is an important piece. And then that way we get data. We have a component that's out in the toolkit. People are using it. We get feedback on it. We kind of get some statistics and knowledge of like, okay, how many people are using these things? What are we seeing the most issues on? Yeah. And we can provide that data back to the platform team and say, hey, like, everyone is using tab view, right? We should have tab view in the platform. And or like the navigation view, like those are how those discussions went down, right? Like we see everyone grabbing the toolkit and using its hamburger menu. Like we should have this in the platform, and that's how navigation view came about. So so it's a really powerful relationship we have with them, and it's great that we've got that relationship. So I'm always happy talking to their team and working with them, and I think they really kind of appreciate that lens that the toolkit has to kind of really try these things out. Like we're a little bit more flexible and trying things out and having experiments that failed and moving our path forward as we can. So, and that's a lot about what the 7.0 release is about too, is just cleaning up our dependencies, making things easier to consume, breaking things apart. So we're not like pulling in all the kitchen sink when you just want like one panel for your particular scenario. Now, I think that will change a little bit in the WinUI 3 space, because the whole SDK is going to be there all the time, but I'm not too sure. That's still a lot of stuff we're figuring out. There's still a lot of unknowns, but it's an exciting place to be, and we're just always excited to be working with community members. And you don't have to be contributing a new feature all the time to make a difference in open source. Like just even taking a PR and trying a new feature that someone's contributing for a spin and giving us feedback or them feedback on it is a really easy first step. or even just, taking an issue and trying to like solve a small bug and submitting a fix. Like we get so many issues, like we don't have the manpower to work and fix on all these things. Like the toolkit's too large, right? And so we really rely on the community to help, drive some of these engagements, like, adding some of these new features. Like we've seen the majority of these features are all community contributions. And so, if we can get that same level of support from the community for, fixing bugs or trying things out ahead of time and giving us feedback, or even, like just filing an issue, like sometimes that's a hurdle for folks, but, giving us feedback, we usually get the most after we ship a release, which is kind of the backwards time. We need some of that feedback early, like, hey, this is broken, we should fix it for the future. Because then other people in the community can see that and like, oh yeah, I know that space, I've used that control, maybe I can try tinkering with it. And so that's the power that we can leverage in the open source working together, especially since the toolkit has so many different components and pieces. Like I don't know how everything works in the toolkit. I know that I should look in the toolkit first if I'm trying to do something, because there might be a solution that I forgot about. I've done that a few times.
Funny. And the thing about community, you got people that are innovative and use this stuff all the time, and they have ideas. Like I think you said Morton submitted some pieces to the toolkit, and so you got people that are, especially like the MVP community, who are really into this, passionate, whatever word you want to use, innovative, and they see something missing. And when it's the SDK, it's hard to get. It's like Billy said, you're talking to the SDK team that's building Windows 8. They got a lot of other issues like localization and stuff they have to worry about. Whereas with the toolkit, they can submit it and say, here, try this out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Hey, Billy, I think we're just about out of time. I think you said you had something you weren't.
Quickly, did I show the text crawler with Clint? Because I think I showed it in the pre-show. We talked about it, but I think we just got involved in the conversation with Clint, and I didn't show it.
I don't remember. But yeah. You had some sort of. There was some sort of timeline thing you had too.
Oh yeah, I had that as well. Let's do that, I guess. Although I tell you what, this is so nice for sort of advanced, a lot of the advanced people watching. Let's take a quick look at this, and then I'll bring up the timeline thing and spend maybe 30 seconds on that. I got interested in what I could do with the UWP, and decided that, with the projections, I could make a program that would sort of that would stream a movie text crawler the same way that a certain movie does that I don't talk about. So anybody's interested in that, I have that as an interesting, that uses a perspective sort of thing. So I don't think I actually talked about that last week, but yeah, the thing I was going to look at real quickly this week was what happened to it. Oh, hang on.
I say that all the time. Where did it go?
Where did it go? Because I got so much stuff. I think it's right there. Yeah.
There it is.
This is one of the examples I talk about a lot when I talk about UX and such. I go, okay, now let's suppose we've got this data. This is some interactions with the customer. Might be a service call, might be a payment, might be a delivery. And unfortunately, a typical application might not do much better than that. And, with all of our modern technologies, we could at least enhance that thing with some shapes and maybe some colors. But then most XAML developers, I think, probably get to this point where they think, yeah, let's come up with an interesting template for that, and we'll use shapes and we'll alter the sizes and such. But I really think that, especially if it's something like that goes on a timeline view, that there is a time component to it. Why don't you just kind of make it part of the oops, sorry, I'm clicking the wrong place here. Why don't you make it sort of an expandable or collapsible timeline? That way, the stuff that's related will all appear together, and we can still use some of the Z order type things to zero in on the one we want. We can use some translucency to kind of see what's behind there. We can change the offset there if we need to group things. We need to save some space. So that ability to sort of look at things in different ways for data visualization, I think, is not really, people don't think about that as when they're doing their apps. We actually ended up with 3 different visualizations on one of our applications recently, a timeline view like this, and a card view and a grid view, and sort of people get to flip between them. And it turns out that for that particular case, the card view was the favorite, but you don't necessarily know ahead of time what it's going to be.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I mean, it's always nice when you have different, you can easily prototype in XAML these different visualizations and then use that. When I first started working with WPF, I was used Blend as a PM. I was used to be a PM. That for all these mock-ups, because it was just so easy to, and then you could click on things and try things out and get feedback from people about, you know, how that felt, and then it was just easy to copy the XAML into the application and then start hooking things up, right? So
I'm thinking that this timeline might need to go into the toolkit, Billy.
It's a nice control. I could open source that and put it in the toolkit. It uses a canvas as the background of the list view, and then the individual items then have styles that make them position. For UWP, I would have to apply those bindings in code, because I still can't data bind style values in UWP, I think.
Yeah, I was actually just asking on the UWP Community Discord server. I thought there was an issue on the WinUI GitHub about that, but if not, there definitely should be one, because I know that's a stopgap from WPF, and I was just trying to use a markup extension as a value too, and I don't think that works. But yeah, some folks are asking in the comments about whether that timeline view you showed was open source, and I know for the toolkit ourselves for UWP and the canvas, we've thought about, well, you know, should we have a canvas that accepts an item source either as an extension or a new control that then can like easily help you with that kind of data binding scenario and laying out items just like you would with a grid or a uniform grid or, you know, any other items control. So there's definitely some interest there. And I think, you know, maybe a couple of different levels, right? And there's just the base canvas that helps you lay things out from a collection. And then there's that, you know, specific timeline view. So always happy to chat with folks about, you know, how we build these experiences and you know, create these components. Those would be really awesome additions to the toolkit for sure.
That's great. Well, we are close to the time limit today. So this has been fascinating. I can't wait I hope you publish this soon, because I want to start using it. And especially the new stuff you showed today. I don't think I actually paid that much attention to what came out in the last release either, because I've been busy. So I'll go back and look at that.
Yeah, we have all of our blog posts, and then we have release notes. Like the sample app has links to the release notes as well, where we document like basically all the fixes and things. We have some previews up on NuGet of the current packages, which there's only been a couple of bugs since the RC one that we shipped that we've been fixing. We've been trying to close things out as much as possible. And it's really just the sample app that's the main thing. But yeah, that release should go live, cross fingers, early next week. But yeah, it's all open source. So you can always pull down the repo and play with things early. And we also have a MyGit. So whenever anything gets checked into master, there's a MyGit package that goes up. So there are ways to play with things on the bleeding edge. I think 7.0 will be having a lot of kind of churn here and there. So 7.0 might be a little rough to change between different pre-release versions. But that's the planning for a couple of weeks from now. We have to figure all of that stuff out.
Well, I want to spend a minute talking to our viewers. This is our 8th episode, and we've had some great conversations, Billy. I think we've had some really interesting technologies on here. We're calling this Season 1. And this is our last episode of Season 1. We're going to take a hiatus for a couple of months, and then Billy and I will probably be back in August or September with more episodes of the Desktop Developer Show. Michael, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Of course, really, really happy to be here, and really appreciate you bringing me on here and giving me this opportunity to talk about the toolkit. It's I know a lot of people know about it, but also a lot of people don't know about it. So I'm always happy to talk about it, because there's such a great, you know, plethora, like we were saying, the gallery of inspiration. There's a lot of stuff there. Even if you don't use it, it kind of gets your brain thinking about what's possible. And we have a lot of great examples of just how to build these controls that are easily consumable in other ways too. So there's a lot of just kind of good kind of stuff there that if you're trying to figure out how to do something, chances are we've done it in the toolkit before.
Nice. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good day.